Victor's being very kind. Truth of the matter is he's been carrying me for the last 20 years. So. Tonight's topic is human trafficking. Human trafficking is a huge topic. It's a big topic. So I'm going to hit the high points, and then I'm going to hit some low points, and then I'm going to throw it to some questions. What I want to do is introduce the topic, and then I want to talk about it in a more direct and personal way as it relates to all of us. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, coercion, violence to exploit people for profit. Traffickers subject their victims to labor exploitation, making them work, to forced military service, and to sexual exploitation. The largest number of victims fall in the category of those involved in forced labor. Trafficking for sexual exploitation obviously typically involves abuse in the commercial sex industry, particularly pornography and prostitution. And in other cases, in lots of cases, in a surprisingly large number of cases, individuals exploit trafficked human beings they have essentially bought, in their homes, demanding often sex and work. Tonight, while we're sitting here in your case, there are at least 12.3 million adults and children in forced labor and commercial sex servitude in the world. At least 1.4 million of these individuals are women and children who tonight are performing acts of prostitution against their will under threats of violence. 56% of all trafficking victims and all forced labor victims are women and girls. Human traffickers prey on their victims with the promise of a better life through employment opportunities, educational opportunities, and then trap their victims with the use of violence. The nationalities of trafficked people are as diverse as the cultures you can find worldwide. Some trafficked folks leave less developing countries, hoping that they're going to somehow improve their life through low-skilled jobs in the more prosperous countries of Western Europe, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Women eager for a better future are susceptible to promises of jobs as babysitters, housekeepers, waitresses, models. Some families give their children to adults who promise them better education, better opportunities in a foreign land, and then sell those children into exploitative situations. Human trafficking is pretty simple to understand. It is driven by the relentless, savage, uncontrolled quest for profit, and profit only. It is driven by the demand for cheap consumer goods. It is driven by state protection of private enterprises, which they ought to be regulating and ought to be controlling, but instead of protecting in illegal and immoral ventures, it is driven by a massive market for illegal sexual favors. Human trafficking is committed by fraudulent recruiters, quote, legitimate employers, corrupt public officials, major corporations, housewives, householders, and all of us who buy goods produced by slave labor. Human trafficking is maintained by economic exploitation, sexism, the narcissism of accumulation and consumption, particularly in Western capitalist societies, particularly in the United States, and by an absolutely blinding xenophobia, which we exhibit all the time here, which turns the victims into criminals and the criminals into economic icons. If you think about the discussion in the United States of human trafficking, it is framed in terms of illegal immigration. Somehow those people are criminals. Those people don't come here by choice. They're brought here. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Human trafficking isn't a crime that occurs in some distant exotic land involving strange people. It occurs right here in Kentucky. If you looked at the Herald Leader in the last 2 years, you would find many cases of human trafficking right here right in our own neighborhoods involving your respectable neighbors. Just a couple quick examples. Out in Crescent Springs last year, federal, state, and law enforcement officers raided a restaurant in which almost all employees were illegal immigrants, were brought here, trafficked here to work in the restaurant. Who do we arrest? We arrested those people who were in servitude. The restaurant stayed open, the restaurant owners continued to operate. We arrested those people who were forced into labor. Last year in Fort Thomas, a leading, respectable business executive was discovered to have falsely imprisoned a housekeeper who he had brought from the Philippines. The victim had signed a contract to work 40 hours a week at a salary roughly equivalent to $1.25 an hour. She had also worked 5,000 hours of unpaid overtime and had also been required to perform sexual acts. She was isolated, confined, abused, threatened, her travel documents taken, and was, of course, arrested as an illegal immigrant. In Lexington last year, a 13-year-old girl and 6 of her friends were induced to have sex with an adult male in return for having a place to stay, for being able to sleep in his home. Of course, she was arrested. In Louisville, the massage parlor industry, which for those of you who have not looked, is enormous and massive, is largely staffed by non-English speaking employees facing huge cultural and legal barriers to making any attempt to escape their forced sexual labor. Those massage parlors are owned by organized crime groups. When the police raided them, of the 120 women they rounded up, 96 were trafficked individuals from other countries. Only 24 were Kentucky residents. These women were routinely moved across state lines from massage parlor to strip club, massage parlor to brothel to escort service to strip club, constantly keeping fresh meat out there for the market. Once again, the law enforcement efforts were directed at the victims, at the women who were forced against their will to engage in acts of prostitution and commerce across state lines. In Lexington, Eastern European residents have been trafficked into Kentucky with regularity to work at hotels. They work at hotels in Lexington, Fort Mitchell, Louisville, and other places. They're engaged in forced labor. Last year, a raid by immigration officials was particularly troubling because a large number of the workers disappeared after the raids, causing considerable concern among their other workers. At all 4 of the hotels, those workers had not been paid for months by the hotels that employed them. Neither the labor contracting agency who supplied them, nor the hotels, nor the hotel management was held criminally responsible for employing slave labor on a regular basis. As I said, the vast majority of human trafficking takes the form of forced labor. Forced labor results in a situation where businessmen and private employers take advantage of gaps in law enforcement and very, very, very weak laws protecting workers from unsafe working conditions and exploitative labor practices. In the United States, we have very weak labor laws. We have no effective system of business regulation, despite the claim by businesses that they're overregulated. We have underfunded and understaffed enforcement agencies. All that creates high levels of vulnerability for workers in a wide variety of industries.